first candle is lit to honor Judaism. Our God, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, you are gracious and compassionate God who keeps loving kindness and in your great compassion does not forsake. The second candle is lit to honor Christianity. Finally, all of you live in harmony with one another. Be sympathetic. Love as brothers. Be compassionate and humble. The third candle is lit to honor Buddhism. Love and compassion are necessities, not luxuries. Without them, humanity cannot survive. The fourth candle is lit to honor Hinduism. It is easy enough to be friendly to one's friends, but to befriend the one who regards himself as your enemy is the quintessence of true religion. The other is merely business. The fifth candle is lit to honor Islam. We have the ability to forgive, to understand, and to comfort one another. Compassion is the essence of who we are. It is the best part of us, the quality that makes us worthy of the mercy of Allah. Our love is an elemental force, a vast untapped potential. We only have to be who Allah created us to be. If we can aspire to that and hew to it, it will suffice us and the earth itself. The sixth candle is lit to honor Baha'i. It is your duty to be exceedingly kind to every human being and to wish him well, to work for the upliftment of society until you change the world of man into the world of God. The final candle is lit to honor Taoism. Regard your neighbor's gain as your own gain, and your neighbor's loss as your own loss. May's theme is care for the poor. Who are the poor? And today's reading comes from Gary Simmons. Every challenge, every difficulty, and every temptation asks you the question, who are you really? If you could, go into the silence for a moment with me. Oh, what a wonderful day it is. I recognize that each and every one of us, each and every life here, is blessed with grace and love and joy and such deep beauty and deep wonder and peace. I'm knowing that each and every one of us is blessed who are here this day, that the message that is given is the message of love and compassion and peace, and that it heals us, that it touches our very souls. I know that we leave here transfixed and transformed with this message that Reverend Cece delivers to us today. And I'm knowing that our children are deeply and divinely blessed and are having fun in the bag. And I'm knowing that each and every person in this community and in this world is blessed. And I say thank you, and so be it.
So this month we're actually exploring compassion, which comes from this value these 10 like social action values we're exploring this year. The underlying idea underneath it is compassion. And compassion in my mind means that we let our real nature, as the candle lighting reading said, that which we are created to be, which is love. We let our real nature come out in our actions, in our words, in what we do in the world. through ways we treat other people, the ways we treat our planet and the life on it. And here's what I think. I'm not alone in this. But I think compassion is the thing that will get us through, us individually and us as humanity, through hard times of whatever nature. We have not relied on it very much in the past in our evolutionary history, but I think it is the answer. I think it's compassion for the planet and the life on it. It's going to get us through the chaos, if you will, of climate change, provided we step up to it, right? I think it's compassion that will get us through the social and political upheaval that we see in the world, provided we step up to it. I think it's compassion that is going to get us through this shift in human consciousness that's trying to happen right now, provided we step up to it. You know, and it is our essence. Our essence is love, but we're habituated to react with fear and judgment and self-protection, as though anyone who's not us or of our tribe is a danger, a threat to us. That is a hoary, ancient response that might have worked when there were little tribes of us seeking control over the hunting ground or whatever, but it doesn't work here and now. It doesn't work anymore. But compassion as a way of life, as the very root of our awareness, is what I think is going to move us into the future. If we live from love and act from love, and that is what the spiritual teachers of all time and all religions have called us to. Lao Tzu, on whose work Taoism was founded, said, I have 3 things to teach: simplicity, patience, compassion. These 3 are your greatest treasures. Simplicity, patience, compassion. And the great Christian mystic Meister Eckhart said, you may call God love, you may call God goodness, but the best name for God is compassion. I love that. And there is a scholar of all world religions, her name is Karen Armstrong, and she said, all religions have always stressed that compassion is not only central to a religious life, it is the key to enlightenment and the true test of spirituality. How compassionate can we be? And so I think collectively right now we're at the place where we either step up to and into living from compassion, or we cave in. We cave to the fear, we cave to the uncertainty, the chaos of the times we live in. We're here. Time is now. It's our choice. We either rise up in transformation or we crumble with the uncertainty of what's going on. And depending on the day, I suppose one sounds easier than the other, but the only way out is through, right? Carl Jung said every transformation demands as its precondition the ending of a world, the collapse of an old philosophy of life, and that's where we are. You know, many of us believe this, that the old philosophies and the old ways of doing things and the old things we learned growing up in postmodern America are collapsing. We stand on this brink of transformation and we aren't really sure what it's going to look like, and that's the scary part for us, is that we don't know what it's going to look like. But think about this. What stands on the other side of it is up to us, right? We're creating it. We are the collective. So we stand on the brink of transformation, and we can be terrified, or we can say, this is actually kind of exciting. Wonder what we're going to create together. What am I going to create here? What is my part in all this? So today's topic turned up, and it is, who are the poor? And I thought, how odd. What an odd title. But as I delved into it, I realized it's wonderfully appropriate and timely. Because one of the old philosophies that's crumbling is our Western view of the poor. And I'm using quotes on purpose. It's way past time for it to crumble. I've been loosely affiliated and want to be more affiliated with an organization called the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And it was started in North Carolina by, I'm going to forget his name all of a sudden. It'll come back to me. Anyway, one of the most moving speakers I have, William Barber. William Barber III, one of the most moving speakers I've ever heard. And one of his people wrote a piece that caught my eye, and this really jumped out at me. He said, perhaps the biggest challenge this movement faces is the national myth that our country consists of the deserving rich who create jobs, innovate, work hard, and are responsible for everything good that happens in our country, and the poor, who are simply liabilities, who leech off the government for free stuff. This myth insinuates itself into all of our public life. And what is our public life? Our public life is our collective idea, our collective consciousness, right? We've created our public life. So what he's saying, I think, is that we hold the poor in place. We sustain that definition in our culture because of our consciousness and what we don't bring from our subconscious into our consciousness. Those people, we've demonized those people, the ones who don't fall into the group of deserving. But most of us don't fall into that class. I'm not wealthy. I don't think most of us are, right? Most of us are getting by. So we've demonized ourselves as part of this group that doesn't somehow deserve the good stuff. And in the past, in our philosophy, we've been told tacitly or explicitly that it's our responsibility if we're poor. There is some truth in that. Don't get me wrong. Our own consciousness is the strongest creative force in our lives, but that's only part of the truth. The other part of the truth is our collective consciousness that's poured into our subconscious as we grow up and gives rise to what we create together. The system that results in money flowing up and not to the rest of the world, right? So there's this deep prejudice against the poor, even though we're one of them. And the idea that our whole society, which is really based upon the work of the 99% of us, that somehow, if we're not wealthy, we're takers. And we've let the poor remain in this definition of poverty in our collective consciousness, and that's what it's time to change. And our founder, Ernest Holmes, addressed this idea. He was talking it's in the Science of Mind book, the textbook. He said the subjective cause, 9 times out of 10, is not conscious in the thought of the person who suffers from it, but is largely the result of certain combinations of thinking that arise from the collective. See, we absorb those, and until we're willing to become conscious of them, they're what's shaping our lives. So we have to be willing to get conscious of the ideas that are shaping our own lives individually and our collective lives. Because the other thing that's fundamental to our philosophy and to all spiritual philosophy is that thing we call God, spirit, higher power, consciousness, whatever it is incarnated in every single one of us. It's in every single one of us. So if we're perceiving the poor, maybe even including ourselves in there, then we're experiencing separation, and we're creating a group. We're assigning people to a group that we hold as somehow separate from the divine good and from us. And so the transformation comes in being able to say yes and, rather than either or. Yes, and my consciousness has a great deal of creative power in my life, and the collective consciousness is at work here, and we contribute to both, right? By what we do, what we think, what we say, what we feel. There's a story from the Bible that I think has played a part in this. And remember, at one point, there is a woman who comes in and pours a jar of scented oil on Jesus' feet and wipes them with her hair. And Judas comes along and says, Why are you wasting that oil? Why didn't you give the money to the poor? And Jesus replies, the poor will be with you always. We've taken that and turned it into this fatalistic statement about some people are just going to be poor, right? But I don't think that's what Jesus meant at all. I think he was saying just the opposite. I think he was saying, be generous and take action to eradicate poverty rather than kind of this, oh well, there'll be poor people. Because there's more to the story. Here's the rest of the story. In saying the poor will be with you always, Jesus was actually quoting from the Torah. Well-known phrase, well-known passage that all the people around him that would have heard him would know. The rest of the quote comes from Deuteronomy chapter 15. If among you one of your brothers should become poor in any of your towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand against your poor brother, but you shall open your hand to him and lend him what is sufficient for his need, whatever it may be. For the poor you will have always with you in the land. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand to your brother, to the needy and the poor in your land. Quite different, isn't it? When we read Jesus' words in their original context, you could see that he meant to spur generosity for the poor. Open wide your hand. That command came straight from Yahweh. Straight from Yahweh. So rather than the fatalistic idea that the poor will be with us always, maybe we should complete the sentence. Therefore I command you, you shall open wide your hand and your heart, I would add, to your brother, to the needy, and to the poor. And the second thing to note about this quote is that Jesus said the words to rebuke Judas, because Judas was scornful to this woman for pouring out her oil on his feet and caring about him. In the book of John it says, Judas didn't say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He was the keeper of the money bag, and he used to help himself to what was put into it. So Jesus' words were aimed at Judas, who was stealing from the poor, and said, you shall open wide your hand, right? This whole notion that Jesus was really calling for generosity and open-handedness and open-heartedness is much more consistent with everything else he taught, after all. You know, this is the guy who purportedly took the open-handed gift of a child and multiplied it so that everyone could be fed and there were leftovers. Remember, it was one little child who had a couple fish and a piece of bread. And in the book of Acts, it says that Jesus' followers eradicated poverty from their society. This is what it says. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in them that there were no needy persons among them. From time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. They eradicated poverty from their culture. That was the natural outcome of taking seriously what Jesus taught. That is the natural outcome of taking seriously any great teacher, great spiritual teaching. We eradicate the poor from our collective consciousness, provided we rise up to live from compassion and in communion with one another. Our founder, Ernest Holmes, actually said, if the philosophy of Jesus were lived, wars would cease, unhappiness would cease, economic problems would be solved, poverty would be wiped from the face of the earth, and man's inhumanity to man would be transmuted into a spirit of mutual helpfulness. And the same is true of the philosophy of Gautama Buddha, or Granth Sahib, or Baha'u'llah, or anyone, or Ernest Holmes, or anyone who has seen the possibility of humanity guided by expanded consciousness. It's compassion combined with connection, community, that will resolve this problem of the poor from our collective consciousness. Compassion lets the love we are guide our action in the world. Community, communion, connection reminds us that we're interwoven with everything. We're one with the one, and it's all interwoven together so tightly that where I end and you start, I can't know. Our relationship with this thing, this God, higher power, divine, whatever, translates into the relationships with the manifestations of it that are all around us. So Ernest Holmes said that the sense of spiritual power, the secret of spiritual power, lies in a consciousness of one's union with the whole and of the availability of good, which is accessible to all people. All life, I would say. And he reminds us that the whole purpose of our philosophy is to reconcile the idea of separation. The separation of the spiritual world, which must be perfect, and the material world, which seems imperfect. We are here to reconcile those two in our minds with both and, not either or, but it's got to be both and. So perhaps our greatest collective poverty has nothing to do with finances and economics, and everything to do with the poverty of awareness. Poverty of awareness that the whole spectrum from poor to rich is a measure of our judgments based on separation. So perhaps the concept of rich and poor separates us from each other. And maybe the consciousness of connection and compassion is what heals that. In his Beverly Hills lectures, Ernest Holmes taught that there is no true healing of ourselves or our society without spiritual revelation. Spiritual revelation comes to us when we look at life through a sense of purpose. What are we here to do? And our purpose, in my view, is simply to be the divine in expression. That's how we reconcile the perfect spiritual world and the seemingly imperfect material world, is by letting all that we do be an expression of that spiritual ideal and perfection that we hold in our hearts, that is the very seed of who we are. As Gary Simmons said, every challenge, every difficulty, every temptation, every time we are tempted to follow along with the way it's always been, that always asks us the question, who are you really? Who are you really? And the answer, of course, has to be, I am the place the divine shows up. I am a manifestation of the one. I am part of the life of the universe, uniquely shaped like me, just as everyone else is the life of the universe uniquely shaped like them, right? It's how we answer that question that will determine our future. Will we be the love that we came here to be? Will we offer that up as compassion engendered from that love? Will we do what is needed to reveal to ourselves and others the oneness of all life? Who are you, really? We have a little gift for you today to help you remember. It says, it's a little bracelet in Science of Mind blue that says on one side compassion and on the other side connection. It's a reminder that compassion we're born from, it is what we are, and connection is how we help resolve these ideas of separation. It's how we live from the divine within, how we heal what needs to be healed in ourselves and in our world.